Suffering versus suffering. This is something I've wanted to talk about for a minute. Actually, it's something I like talking about quite a lot. I spend a lot of time thinking about suffering. And while at first it seems like I might be trying to be cute, at the end of the day, suffering is universal. Suffering is suffering. There is no separation. And so to try to suggest there's a distinction in types of suffering is a little game of words, and I guess maybe that's not the right way to put it. It's not a I'm not playing around. I mean, while I find this subject amusing in a certain way, I'm not trying to be cute or funny. There are apparently two ways that we suffer as people. And I've started to term these as unique and universal suffering. Unique suffering is a very personal form of suffering. It can be isolating. It is most often isolating, meaning isolating us as individuals from other people. It has a very engaging story attached to it. If you'll tolerate the word narrative, that's another way of putting it. But there is a story to be told in unique suffering with me as the center or the central character of that story. Uh, Unique suffering tends to not present agency, and I think that's being pretty charitable. I think it pretty regularly removes agency from the equation, from the central character, and the way that we experience unique suffering is a dualistic mindset. I want to take a pause to talk about what I mean by that, and then I can go on. What I mean by dualistic, because this is going to come up, is the idea that there is a subject and an object in any unfolding event. There's me, and there is this pen, or an event, an unfolding. There's something that's taking place. There's something happening, and I am separate from that happening. This is the way most of us most commonly experience our lives dualistically. The world is unfolding around us in a variety of ways, and we are the experiencer. Okay, universal suffering is more easily shared, and I'll get into what I mean by that in a second. It is, as opposed to isolating, it is relatable. Um, there is a way to tell a narrative about universal suffering, but it is less dramatic. It's not as exciting of a story. In fact, a deeply investigated form of universal suffering can be actually kind of boring to hear about. It's like, okay, cool. It can be. And universal suffering presents a kind of agency, and it is non-dualistic. What's important to understand about this, and I've pretty evenly split the two, is that when push comes to shove, any experience of suffering can be looked at in either way. Anything that unfolds can be seen in a kind of unique suffering sort of way. There's a thing that's happening to me. And then in a universal suffering way, I start to actually see what is actually the suffering. And you can see I'm already teasing where my bias falls and what way of looking at suffering I find to be more useful. I have found to be more useful, at least at this point. Here's a real example from my life. So I play beach volleyball 3 times a week. There's a period of time during the rainier seasons where we might arrive at the beach, say, for example, this happens, get there, and it just opens up. The sky opens up. It's just pouring. So from a unique suffering perspective, the weather's happening to me, right? I've I've made all the arrangements to get everybody organized to show up. I've organized my morning, gotten up early, and I'm already an early riser. You can already see where I'm starting to kind of position myself as a central character. But to somebody who's runs a gardening center in town, um, it's really hard for them to relate to my unique suffering. They, if I try to go to them with this narrative, they'll, put on this face of, deep understanding and compassion, and really what they're thinking is, oh, just save me on my water bill. I don't have to water my plants. I mean, I'm actually kind of glad it rained this morning. I got up, I woke up late and I didn't get out there, and so and I can come up with several examples where for one individual this event unfolding is not a source of their suffering. It's actually a source of joy for them. It's great fortune or blessings if they want to look at it that way, and trying to get that person to see the my suffering, which may or may not have value. It may not, but it's certainly a suffering that I'm experiencing in isolation, even though I'm experiencing it with other players that are also in their own isolating way experiencing it. We can all kind of relate. We have sort of an empathy going on, but we're all in this place where we're not holding any cards. We're just at the whims of nature and trying to figure out what our next move is. Do we cancel for the day? We're looking on the horizon, trying to make our best decision. But in this moment, we're suffering. And you can scale this up. You can take this to the worst possible event that you can imagine. And it doesn't take a ton of creativity to bring the topic of, death or somebody's, sick that and care about. And it ends up, you end up in the same sort of unique suffering for that. Now, some people will try to tell you that you shouldn't have expectations, right? That expectations are somehow the problem. But we can't live in a world without expectations, otherwise nobody could drive on the freeway. You wouldn't know what that 2-inch move from the car in the lane over from you just meant, that they were going to cut off they're going to cut in front of you without using their signal. You wouldn't even be able to figure that out if you hadn't developed a system of predictability from your experience of however long you've been driving. You go through your whole world in much this way, that the same way you do on the freeway. You're developing sort of a low-level science of predictability and expectations of what should generally unfold around you based on a bunch of signals that you're not even conscious of most of the time. And so there's a ton of utility in having expectations. I wouldn't try to attack expectations, but I can recognize that what has happened is I have expectations that aren't being met, and there'll be nothing I can do to sit here and wish that what isn't so. And this is really what's happening in universal suffering. In a world of universal suffering, what I am suffering is the desire for circumstances to be other than what they are. So the simple but not easy solution is to stop desiring that whatever it is, stop desiring that things are other than what they are. And if you've ever tried to turn off your desires, you know how awesomely easy that is. It's not. It's pretty much impossible to make our desires go away. But what we do have agency over is where we focus our attention. And if I'm putting myself in a position of unique suffering, and I'm experiencing this unfolding rain as happening to me, there's no move that I can make to get out of it. It's going to continue happening until some undetermined time, and until it stops, I'm suffering for it. And I can go shop it around to people, and they'll put on the face to pretend like they understand what I'm talking about, and really thinking, thank God I didn't have to water my plants. But in a universal suffering, each of us understands intuitively, without being taught, we understand suffering for that which we wish wasn't as it is. Let me back up and restate that. We all know what it feels like to want things to be other than what they are. We all get that. We all get wanting a different circumstance, a different object to arise, a different event to unfold, someone to treat us differently than they've treated us, rain to not fall. We We universally can relate, even if we actually kind of wanted the rain. We can understand the simple claim, I really wish things were other than what they are right now. And just like our desires, we have no control over our aversions, which is just desires opposite. There's no off switch for desire or aversion. But we do have a kind of agency when we manipulate the spotlight of our attention. So, what is possible, and this is, again, let's back up. This is possible in both forms of suffering. The importance of the distinction is that it's harder. I find it harder to let go of unique suffering. It's too good of a story. I can think of all the social media platforms where I'm going to get all the attention I want, all the compassion I can get for all the suffering that I've had. There's too much at stake with unique suffering. There's too many places where I can shop my suffering around and get the face, but it doesn't change anything. And it's far more useful for me to just next it. Just next it. Next. What's the next thing? There's another thing that I can focus my attention on. Turn my bike and bike home. You know what I'm about to do? I'm gonna go home, get home as safely as I can, take a nice hot shower. This isn't happening today. I'm gonna start looking forward to that hot shower right now because there's nothing I can do about stopping the rain. I don't know when it's gonna stop. It won't stop. It's not gonna stop till I'm halfway home. That's when it's gonna stop. When I'm gonna go, oh gosh, I made the wrong call. Next. I'm going to go take a hot shower. I'm going to get an early start on my work day because I do this before work. By noon, I'm going to feel like I got a whole bunch of work done that I wouldn't have gotten done otherwise. I can start thinking of all the next things that I'm going to do. And I can do that more efficiently and faster when I allow my suffering to not be an object or an event that's happening to me, and I understand that it's me wanting things to be other than what they are. And that's fine, and I can be loving about that, and I can be understanding about that part of me, but I can also very quickly go, okay, next. What's the next thing? You may feel like I'm splitting hairs. You may feel like, Damon, that's just silly. It's silly. You've made up unique and universal suffering, and you're right. I have. I've made them up as a means to try to tease apart a way that we experience what we consider as suffering and to shift agency back into our hands about how we are going to respond to the unfolding events of our world that don't exactly fit into our definition of what we thought was going to happen. What was supposed to bring us joy isn't what is unfolding. It's useful. It's useful to be able to see it and move on from it quicker. More quickly? Do I mean to say more quickly?